Hey guys, this is John. Today we're going to have a look at a classic attacking motif dating back to the 1880s. I also have some over-the-board experience with this particular attacking idea, so we'll have a look at that game as well. But first, let's look at the source game. This was played by Emanuel Lasker with the white pieces, the longest reigning world champion, 27 years, against Johann Bauer with the black pieces. And this game was played in Amsterdam in 1889. Lasker opened with f4, the bird's opening. And before we get too deep in this game, I do want to mention there was a game played in 1884 between Amos Byrne and John Owen, where Owen, with the black pieces, actually executed the double bishop sacrifice. But unfortunately for him, he lost the game, and I think history was not so kind to him. Chess history is like the rest of history, I guess. The winners end up writing it. And Owen did achieve a winning position, but he messed it up a bit, and hence, Lasker and his sacrifice is always associated with this. But I might take a look at that Owen game because it is pretty interesting. But back to Lasker versus Bauer. So Lasker, very early on in this one, fianchettoed his dark square bishop. You do often see this with bird's opening. And Bauer played ordinary moves in the opening, I would say. Natural looking, but kind of unimpressive. And Lasker brings this bishop out to d3. This does block his d-pawn, but this is for sure a prelude of what's to come, with the two bishops occupying adjacent diagonals. But so far, nothing to be worried about for black. So we have standard-looking development. Both sides castle. And now Lasker plays knight e2, so unveiling the bishop again, which he had just blocked by playing knight c3. And here would have been a good moment for Bauer to play knight c5. And just try to eliminate this light square bishop. Doesn't really have anywhere to run. I mean, b5 is not a stable square. You can just attack it. So that would have been a good way to just neutralize this bishop pair that white has. But instead, Bauer played c5, trying to grab space with his pawns. Knight g3, queen c7, and now knight e5, jumping to the center. There's a trade of knights. Bauer played queen c6, and Lasker replies queen e2. Good multi-purpose move. Develop the queen, have it protect g2, so if black plays d4, there's no problem with a mate threat coming down here, because black does have a queen-bishop battery. And now again, Bauer's next move seems normal, but it's probably the losing move. So I think he already had to start thinking prophylactically, and the engine says g6 is the best move here. And we've talked about this at length on my channel, so looking to put pawns connected, two connected pawns defending one another, or at least this front pawn being reinforced so you can try to block a bishop. But instead he plays a6, maybe thinking that bishop b5 was a threat, or perhaps looking to expand with b5. And now Lasker played knight h5. And Lasker probably had some attacking ideas in mind, but he really gets to write his name in the history books with the coming play. So Bauer captures this knight. And if you haven't seen this idea before and would like to pause your video and figure out how white should play, go ahead. I think the title's a bit of a giveaway, of course, but give it your best shot. White to play. Yes, I have a Christmas tree mug, in case you're wondering. All right, so Lasker played bishop takes h7. And this double bishop sacrifice notoriously happens in this fashion, taking the h-pawn, and then very soon sacrificing the other bishop. So bishop takes h7, trying to rip out that king, trying to expose it. King takes h7. Black could play king h8, but that's definitely not going to help. White will play queen takes h5, regaining the piece and ready for discovered check, followed by mate. So king takes h7. And now the thing with this double bishop sacrifice is you almost always throw in an intermediate queen check before you sacrifice the other bishop. So here we can play queen takes h5 with check, which is what Lasker did. And after king g7, now you're ready to sacrifice the other bishop against the g-pawn. So bishop takes g7. And white is threatening queen h8 at this point. Queen h8 checkmate. So black has limited ways to respond to that. In the game, Bauer took with the king. One other thing you'll have to think about, and we'll look at this in a couple other examples coming up, is what happens if black moves the f-pawn, trying to make way for the king to run. So, for example, f6. And when I originally saw this game, I thought queen g6 would be the answer. threatening discoveries. And again, black's looking to run this way. If queen h8, black can run out with the king. But queen g6 is not so clear after queen g6. Black can bring their queen back and try to have it join the defense and look to force a queen trade. But instead, bishop h6 actually forces mate, threatening queen g6. And yeah, black's days are numbered, because now if queen e8, we can check from g4. And the queen will reach g7 very soon with checkmate. So be aware of that. If you ever get a chance to use the double bishop sacrifice, or you're analyzing it, moving the f-pawn to try to stave off that mate threat on h8 or h1 is possible, but it very often will fail. So in the game, though, Bauer took on g7, and now Lasker smartly threw in a check with the queen here. So queen g4. There's an interesting line. If he tries to lift the rook, because this game is not over yet. White still needs to actually checkmate the black king. Sacrificing the bishops on their own is not enough to win. So you need more pieces involved. The queen can't get the job done by herself. So rook f3 looks normal, trying to play rook g3, but it's a pretty nice variation where black can play rook h8, attacking the queen. And if rook g3, this remarkable move, bishop g5. And in playing this, black gets away and is actually thriving. Note that you don't want to play king f8 because a queen takes h8 mate. Likewise, king f6 runs into queen g5 mate. But bishop g5, like a magic move, freeing up the e7 square in some lines. For instance, if queen takes g5, king f8, white might continue queen g7, but then black is slipping away. Or also potentially allowing black to use the f6 square. If white takes with the rook, rook takes g5, now king f6. And there's no queen g5 mate, and the queen is under attack. So Lasker did not lift the rook immediately. He played that queen g4 check. And now black is forced to the h-file, because king f6 is going to run into mate here. There's no point in sacrificing the bishop and allowing takes when you have to move the king to the h-file anyways. So Bauer played king h7, and here comes the rook lift. Rook h3, threatening rook f3 mate, trying to get this column mate. And the game didn't quite end here, so Bauer played e5. Looks like a hopeless move, but the idea is after rook h3, he can bring the queen over to h6. And I wonder if Lasker saw this in advance. He probably did, but after rook takes h6, king takes h6, he now has queen d7, forking the two bishops. And in this way, even though he didn't mate black straight up, black is losing too much material, and the rest of the game was largely a mop-up job for Emanuel Lasker. I'll just play through the moves very quickly, but the result was never really in doubt. I mean, white has a queen against a rook and bishop, black's king is exposed, white even has some extra pawns. Bauer played on a little bit long here. Lasker did a sacrifice on f6, but he ended up winning the material back with interest. The final move of the game was kind of funny. So right here, Bauer somewhat hopelessly played d3, and Lasker played queen takes d3, maybe emphasizing the fact that, hey, you're lost. I can even give you my queen, and you're still totally lost because you're down 5 pawns. So this is the source game for the Lasker double bishop sacrifice. And again, it almost always follows the same pattern. Sacrificing one of the bishops, either on h2 or h7, to expose the enemy king. And then inserting this intermediary check. In this case, it comes with a capture, but it doesn't always have to come with a capture. But that's how you set up this future threat of mate when you sacrifice the other bishop. So you have the queen and the bishop working together to threaten checkmate, and therefore very often expose this king completely. And if you have a rook that can join the attack as well, like via this rook lift, you're sitting pretty. So let's look at another example of this. This next one we're going to look at was played in, I believe, 1914 in St. Petersburg. And this is Aron Nimzowitsch versus Siegbert Tarrasch. So two titans of chess history going at it here. And we joined the position a bit before black, Tarrasch in this case, was able to execute the double bishop sacrifice. So it was black's move, and Tarrasch played an excellent line opening move. So he played d4, opening his light square bishop. And just like Lasker in the previous example, he has those bishops occupying adjacent diagonals, assassins towards the white king. Got to be careful if you're white. This position, I think, is already quite dangerous, but Nimzowitsch could perhaps play g3. and try to use this idea of placing pawns connected on the same diagonal as the bishop to block it. And he's still pretty weak on the light squares, and this move is possible, but he might have had some survival chances had he played this. But instead, Nimzowitsch captures on d4. And you should all be familiar with what's coming now. So Tarrasch plays bishop takes h2 check, king takes h2, queen h4 check, king g1, bishop takes g2. And now, if king takes g2, we're going to see something similar, a check here to force the king over, let's say to h1. And now a rook lift, rook d5, getting ready for rook h5, and white is done for here. It'll be checkmate very soon. So instead, Nimzowitsch decides to play f3. And this is a bit different from the previous example, because in the Lasker game, I was showing bishop h6, trying to set up a queen g6 idea. But here I think bishop h3 is not going to be as good. White can play, for instance, knight e4, covering the g3 square. And with the queen being able to help out along the second rank, white's probably doing okay here. So Tarrasch instead brings another piece into the action. He's not satisfied with queen h1, king f2 either. You can sometimes consider this, but it's probably just not quite enough play here. Queen's under attack, and the king may slip away to the queen side. So instead, he plays rook f to e8. Excellent move. Hinting at the idea of rook e2, so trying to control the king f2 flight square so he can set up queen h1 mate. And also just in general, restricting the king, making sure it has limited running room. And still, if king takes g2, rook e2 check, white's going to get mated very soon. For example, like this. So rook f e8, the attack continues. Nimzowitsch plays knight e4, looking to block the e-file, maybe get the queen involved again. But now Tarrasch plays queen h1 check. And this time, after king f2, bishop takes f1, the problem for white is if they play rook takes f1, they're going to get skewered. Queen h2 check. King moves, and we pick up the queen, and game over. So the circumstances changed very slightly when this knight came here, and white was, even though white was trying to help with their queen along the second rank, perhaps, this is possible now. So this was reached in the game. Nimzowitsch played d5, trying to open up this diagonal, looking to land knight f6 check if possible. But the following sequence was pretty nice. Tarrasch played f5, so that on knight f6 he can move his king up here, and he'll still have threats, especially queen g2 mate. So Nimzowitsch played queen c3, looking to keep the knight here in some desperate hope that it can act as a shield if the king needs to run to the e-file, threatening queen g7 mate. But now queen g2 check, king to e3. Note that king e1, on the other hand, would run into immediate checkmate here, queen e2. So king e3, and now rook takes e4. The attack continues. F takes e4. And now here Tarrasch found a unnecessarily long checkmate. There is actually checkmate in 3 here by playing queen g3, king d2, and then queen f2. And the king just gets cornered here, queen e2 mate. Nice job with the bishop assisting here. One of the sacrificing bishops still surviving and assisting in the checkmate. But instead, Tarrasch played f4, and this also led to checkmate. King takes f4, rook f8 check. White's king was driven forward. Kind of a nice sequence here. Queen h2, even though it was long. Rook e8, king d7, and now the concluding move. Nimzowitsch allowed checkmate, bishop to b5. Yeah, nowhere to go. The rook is defended. Also, the dark squares here are controlled by the faraway queen. So this is a nice 1914 example of the Lasker double bishop sacrifice. And beautiful execution by Tarrasch, playing d4 and opening his light square bishop, and correctly judging that he had enough material, even in the case that white had f3 here, looking to run with the king, and realizing after rook f e8 that the king was still doomed nonetheless. Now, I mentioned I had some over-the-board experience with this double bishop sacrifice. This was a game that I had the black side of in 2003 against a grandmaster. I was playing Grandmaster Joel Benjamin, FIDE rating 2589 at the time. I was 2300. I believe I was a FIDE master. And yeah, this was the 2003 World Open. I played a Scandi in this game, by the way. We reached this position, and I realized at the time that I was worse here, and noticed that my opponent already has the double bishops here poised in the bishop pair. So I tried to induce the coming sacrifice. I did actually see that Grandmaster Benjamin had the opportunity to play the double bishop sacrifice in the coming variation, but I didn't like my position that much. I thought it was cramped, and I also didn't see how his double bishop sacrifice would be successful. So I played c5 here, opening my light square bishop. Benjamin played knight takes d7. I took with my knight and essentially invited him to attack h7 and g7. So he played d takes c5, much like Tarrasch in the last game, opening the bishop. I took back with the knight. And now, if you want to try to visualize this, maybe ask yourself why this situation is a bit different from the situations that Bauer and Nimzowitsch succumbed to in the last two examples. So if white plays bishop takes h7 and we get into the double bishop sacrifice, why is this position a little bit different? Okay, so it has to do with two things. One, my queen may be able to help out in a better capacity than we saw in the last two games. And two, I might also be able to use my bishop coming to e4 at a strategic time. So the game continued. Bishop takes h7 check. King takes h7. Queen h5. Again, same mechanism, same type of move order. King's forced back to g8. And bishop takes g7, threatening queen h8 mate. And I knew I would not be able to get away with f6 or f5 here. This time, queen h8, king f7 takes is working. We touched on a similar variation in the last one because if rook takes f8, given that black's down material, it makes sense to try to capture the bishop back. There's queen h7 and go pick up the queen. White wins material. So I knew I wouldn't be able to rely on that, so I did play king takes g7. My opponent checked me, queen g5. I played king h8. And now here, if white were to lift the rook, let's say rook e3, the key thing is I have this move f6, attacking the queen and opening the 7th rank. And if rook g3, yes, I do have to give up my queen, queen h7, but I have quite a few pieces for the queen here. I have a knight, a bishop, and a rook for the queen. You know, if we kind of consider that these rooks cancel each other, knight, bishop, and rook for the queen, white does have, what, 2 extra pawns? But that's not too bad, and the fact that the knight and the bishop are stable is pretty important here too. I actually feel like black is coordinating well. I think when I ran this through the engine as I was preparing the material for this video, it did say that white was a bit better, but there's no clear win or anything. So this is the type of defense that I envisioned when I invited Benjamin to do this sacrifice. So he saw that, and the game went in a slightly different way. He put queen h5 check. I played king g7, he threw in another check, king h8, repeating, queen h6, king here. And now he decided to lift the rook, rook a3. But again, even though rook g3 or rook h3 looks to be a threat, I can play f5 and open the 7th rank, looking for queen g7 as a defense. Note that e6 is protected by my nice stable knight, and I can survive. He played rook g3 here, and queen takes g3. I should also mention this bishop e4 defense that I was alluding to. I don't know where exactly I was thinking. This game was played in 2003, so it was a while ago, but I do remember thinking I might be able to do this and play the bishop back to g6 or h7 at some moment. But yeah, that was another reason I felt pretty confident about this, in addition to my queen being able to sacrifice for the rook if necessary. So yeah, back to the game. I played f5. The game went rook g3 check, queen takes g3, h takes g3, and I played rook d8. So I'm essentially agreeing to a draw at any moment because white can perpetual my king. But hey, being black against a strong grandmaster, and I thought given the circumstances that would be a very good result. And the game did indeed end in a draw. We repeated for a while here. He tried some attempts to open the position, but I think I did a good job of marshaling my forces. And it ended up being drawn on move 40. Yeah, back and forth here. I think it's a bit risky to play for a win, although I have now fended off the waves of attack. I still have to take care with my position. His king is pretty safe relative to mine. Material-wise, it's about equal, so I was satisfied with a draw, and we agreed it here. So I hope you enjoyed this mini exploration of the Lasker double bishop sacrifice. We looked at a couple successful examples and then one not so successful example. Actually, Joel Benjamin wrote an article on this tournament after the event, and he was lamenting the fact that he had waited his entire chess career to get the double bishop sacrifice and couldn't resist the temptation to go for it, but he didn't even win. So he expressed some disappointment about that, but he was a good sport about it, and he showed the game in his article. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions about the Lasker double bishop sacrifice, let me know, and I'll be back again soon with another video. Bye, guys. Shout out to John Owen.